Hello. Thank you for having me here. I want to share my experience of learning new things in last 5 years, and I think soon you will get the title. So, basically, first few words about me. I'm currently working at Intergalactico, a nerd cloud design studio, which was previously known as SC5. And my title at the moment is Design System Specialist, but basically it is around front-end development, and so far the whole front-end engineer life, I had been developing different pattern libraries. Then it was style-driven development, component development, and now it is called design systems. But previous years, it was about the same stuff, just other buzzwords. And I can say that I did it across the world and in different technologies. So initially, it was just plain CSS and some XSLT templates. Does anyone know what XSLT is? Ooh. quite advanced audience. Yeah, but for example, when I tell it to students at university, they are like, huh? So, but anyway, so sometime later, it was again building components and libraries in a couple of JavaScript frameworks, which were about to conquer the world, but I don't think that the names will say anything to you. And sometime later, it was a bit of Angular, and currently it is React. So you can see that it's always new things to be introduced to the projects, like new technologies. And it's always a question, how do you learn these technologies? But it's the chicken egg problem a bit, because as an engineer, I need to bring these technologies to the current projects. But on the other hand, I can only learn by doing. So I basically have to have project with these new technologies to gain the knowledge. But this, I guess, the problem every engineer faces, especially in front end when we have a new framework every 2 weeks. So mostly the answer to like how to overcome this challenge is, okay, let's make a pet project and try new technologies over it. And some people I know are really good in thinking up what this pet project could be. But some are not so good, and I'm one of them. So when we start doing these pet projects, this is what happens. This is just search by to-do word on GitHub. And when I preparing to this talk, I took this screenshot, and it was less than 150,000. But yesterday, I wanted to update the image. It was already more than 150,000. So basically, and the question for me was, am I doing another to-do app or what? And I decided that, okay, it should be a little bit more useful. And so I went with my blog. But the problem is that the blog is just pages with texts. It's not so much about front-end development. So in this moment, I understood that, okay, it will be a bit of our engineering, but I'm okay with that. And I decided that everything will be open sourced, not only the code which builds the blog, but also the texts. And I hosted it on GitHub. And this is a super cool thing, because I even got pull requests to fix my broken grammar. And the sources were in Markdown, which also helps, because you can edit it in GitHub embedded interface. And since I hosted it on GitHub pages, it had to be plain HTML, so I decided that it has to generate HTML from Markdown. And the first setup was five years ago, and initially I went with Jekyll, which you probably know is embedded into GitHub, so you don't even need to build anything. You just commit Markdown files, and then GitHub builds everything for you. And even though I do not use this setup anymore for the blog, I still use Jekyll a lot. For example, this very presentation is written in Markdown and built in with Jekyll and hosted on GitHub pages. I will share a link. And front-end-wise, this was the main thing, like what kind of technologies I will try on front-end. So initially, it was BEM for CSS, and its components were separated in different files, and I built everything with GNU Makefile. And then after a while, I tried Borshik. It's like another building tool. Then BEM tools. And also I tried BEM color library of interface components. And I optimized everything with CSS. A year later, I got bored with this Jekyll, and I was thinking to get something faster. And that time, I switched to DOCPAD. And I experimented a lot with building the front end. So it was first Grunt, then I switched to Gulp. And after that, not so much changes on how the front end builds and how interface components look. But I managed to test different approaches there. For example, I tested the style guiding solution, my own style guide solution onto the blog components. And this worked really very well, because once I had to present this on the conference, but I couldn't share the link to my working projects. It was under NDA, but I still had to show kind of demo, and I just provided link to style guide of my blog, and it was good. And since everything was componentized and documented, it was very easy to test different visual regression testing solutions on that, because like I can try different tools and then see how it works. And then the last setup was over a year ago. I went with METALSMITH for generating HTML, and I looked at a lot of options, but I've chosen METALSMITH because I liked how it's very pluggable, and one of the plugins allowed to use React as templating solution there. So basically for server-side rendering, and it all gathered, the bundles were done with webpack, and for styling solution, I used CSS modules. And of course, I wanted a bit more advanced, and so I created a couple of components to be rendered on client, and everything else to be on server and tuned webpack this way. But the challenge of my blog also is that it is in two languages. So sometimes I write in English, sometimes in Russian. And if it's the same post, I prefer keep the sources together under the same directory. But it doesn't mean that all the posts have two files. And when building HTML, I prefer that these suffixes, language suffixes, they go as prefixes to the URLs because it's easier for people. And of course, if when building, if I can calculate that translation exists, I can provide corresponding link. So this is, I managed to do it on METALSMITH, and this was one of the reasons why I've chosen it. And so the development flow is like you run npm run dev or yarn dev, and then it runs server on the machine so that I can develop. And at the same time, with Webpack configuration, it builds JavaScript and CSS bundles. And using JavaScript bundle, it provides HTML according to React templates. And of course, I can build everything in static if I want to deploy. So as for front-end, as I said, so I use React components for server-side rendering, and a couple of components, a couple of React components work dynamically in browser, and in theory, I can implement a single-page application on some page of the blog. And I use CSS modelers for both, and one component is in styled components now. And this is a funny story, important for the talk, actually. So I already prepared the slides when I noticed that some CSS is built not as it has to build. But before that, I tried style components on the blog, and I did. In the work projects, I already used them, and it was very easy. You just install a package and then write according to the documentation, and everything works. But in the blog, it didn't work somehow, and I started to Google why, and then I read some threads which seemed to me corresponding to my problem, and in the threads it was said that, okay, it's designed this way, we will never support this. I was, oh, I cannot use styled components. But actually, when I fixed this inaccuracy in building webpack, I was like, well, what if I try styled components again? And magically everything worked. So it was nothing wrong with styled components. I just had to write webpack configuration correctly. So maybe I should have asked you. Yeah. And so wrapping it up, the whole idea to use blog is quite good. I'm happy that I can over-engineer a bit because this was the goal. I can try all the fancy new technologies. And I like that with METALSMITH, building goes quite fast. I can stand it and focus on the trying the front-end technologies. And blog is not big application. It's just code base. It's not large, and it's a plus because when introducing new technologies, you can cover the whole project very fast. And basically, it is ready to try this like framework of the week. And there are drawbacks, of course, because of this over-engineering. I'm writing blog as an application and not for the blog because it was meant to publish some texts. And there are solution-specific limits. No, basically, as I said in the story about style components, maybe these limits are not about solutions, but about the people, me as a person who uses this solution. But yeah, there are some challenges which I do not face at work, but I faced them in my blog, and it a little bit makes it slower to implement something new. But overall, maybe I should have changed it the other way around. So basically, I'm happy I can make this. Yeah, this is the main thing. So that's it. Thank you very much. These are the slides, and you can contact me if you want to see the code.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.